2. And welcome everyone to another edition of the Church Solutions Podcast. My name is Phil Thompson.
And I'm Steve Lacy.
Steve, good to have you here today. How's life for you on your end of Tucson, Arizona?
Doing wonderful.
All right.
What they say, the lyrics from a Hawk Nelson song, sunny and high of 75. So.
Okay. I think it's only going to be 65 today, but that's fine.
I know.
We're fine with that. We're close enough. So it's good to have everybody. Welcome our viewers and listeners to this podcast. Appreciate that. We have a very special guest today. Dr. Heidi Campbell is our guest, and she is a professor of communication and actually a presidential impact fellowship at Steve's rival university, Texas A&M. She's also the director for the Network of New Media, Religion and Digital Cultural Studies. And Dr. Campbell's research focuses on technology, religion, digital culture. And there's an emphasis here on the Jewish, Muslim, and Christian media negotiations. She's also been involved in numerous publications. I mean, like authored over 100 articles and books. Some of those include When Religion Meets New Media, Digital Religion, Digital Creatives, and the Rethinking Religious Authority in Digital Culture, just to name a few. And she is an expert, if you haven't figured that out by now, widely quoted on all sorts of subjects in the area of religion and digital media, literally all over the world. Dr. Campbell, thank you so much for being a part of the Church Solutions Podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to take a break from grading to be here.
Well, there you go. And you know, before we jump into some really difficult questions for you to answer for us, I'm being kind of funny here, but maybe I'm not. You're one of the, I think in all the years we've been doing video and audio podcasts, like over 10, you are the only one that we've had to redo a podcast with. You have that distinct honor. So welcome to this new club.
Well, it's good to be with you a second time.
We had some audio issues and actually we had technical issues before, and we won't get into that. But anyhow, we're glad to have you here. So Steve, drill Dr. Campbell, who have some really hard questions about digital media.
So let's start with some things. You've obviously have the credentials with both digital media and working with the church and religions. What first drew you to that field of study?
Well, I started kind of really looking at the area of kind of religion and digital media back in about 1996. So this was, when the internet first became a kind of a public entity. And I had just moved overseas to do a master's in theology and ethics of communication in the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. And while I was there, obviously kind of connecting with people back home was really important. So for one of my essays in the course, I just was exploring the idea of what is church going to look like because of if we use digital media, and how could the virtual church be a real church, or what would that look like? And that actually opened the doors for me to do my PhD work, and kind of, taking a small essay into a larger project and looking at the early days of the internet and how that was going to be impacting, especially faith communities.
So now that's 20 something years ago. It seems like yesterday to me, because I'm old, I guess. So over the years, this digital wave has broken within the church. And some churches have kind of gone kicking and screaming towards embracing this. What are some of the benefits of participating in it versus just sitting on the sidelines and let this wave pass through?
Well, as you know, this year has been a really interesting moment, and it's interesting to see how a lot of people I've known that both critique my work, because the fear that if we kind of get it online. Churches go plug in and log on. They're going to face-to-face community is going to be destroyed, or kind of human relationships are going to be kind of tossed to the side. And so a lot of the both critics, as well as kind of, I would call it, the laggards or the people resistant to it, had to kind of change their tune this year because of COVID-19. When basically a face-to-face meeting was impossible, technology became the only way for people to meet. So it's been interesting to see kind of, people, there's still concerns, I think, about, especially for religious groups, how does technology shape faith and shape human relationships? But being able to see technology as a gateway to creatively gather in a new way, because it says, where two or three are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's always has to be embodied. Why can't we use technology to meet in a virtual way? And of course, there's limitations to that meeting, but it's still a form of meeting and interaction. And it's been great to see how people have been experimenting over the last year, looking at what that could look like and how that could, at least be a supplement at this time and a substitute during this time period, even though it's maybe not the full answer for the long run.
Right. So that's a common complaint, I think, and people recognize that. I mean, meeting in person is much richer experience than meeting online. But things have, over the past 25 years or so, things have gotten better even with the online side. Where do you see it going? Do you think we'll get to the point where we're going to do both, kind of like we are now with COVID forced environment, where everyone's having to focus with online? But 10 years out from now, what's the trend line look like? Is it, do we just get really accelerated to the digital side, or are we going to go back to the good old ways? Or what's your crystal ball say for that?
Well, I think, like the early fears and assumption is that either you could be online or offline, and there was no kind of in between space. And that was the big fear, that people were going to opt for doing kind of things virtually or through tech mediated forms of interaction and not have that kind of connection. So it was the kind of the idea, and it was still also like in the 90s, like the idea of virtual reality. They thought, we're all going to be kind of downloading our brains in 10 years, and we're all going to have this virtual existence. And while obviously, through especially like gaming platforms and other kinds of, technology, we can do that if we wanted to. But the reality now is that we live in this, hybrid world. There's a lot of been recent conversations about the idea of hybrid church, where it's not, online, it's not offline, it's kind of a meeting in the middle. And this has been talked about, in education, a lot, the idea of the hybrid classroom for, over a decade, because the internet has become so embedded in our everyday lives and digital media. So, we can't bank, we can't, do a lot of interactions. We can't do financial transactions. We can't do a lot of our business without digital media. And so it's kind of learning to that kind of middle stage. And so really the kind of reality we have now here is more of an augmented reality, AR technology, where it's, that we have, where we're functioning in embodied spaces, but technology is enhancing, supplementing, and in some cases substituting for that. And I think that's where the church is I think this 2020 has taught the church that, you don't have to be one or the other. Obviously you want to be face to face, but you can't. But how can you use the technology to kind of, bridge the gap, as it were? And then the challenge of, okay, in a post-pandemic reality, what have we learned from these experiments and this interactions that we need to take on that could kind of extend the way that we see what community, the body of Christ is, what a mission work is, in an age that's very digital and very digitally dependent.
Let me jump in and ask a question. Maybe I might get us off track here a little bit, but you work, you've not just Christianity, but you've got experience with Muslims and Hindus and other walks of faith. What have you found from your experience, Dr. Campbell, that's maybe some religious groups, because of their cultural background, are there any groups that are opposed or really have just dragged in jumping into the digital media because of their past culture?
I did a study about 10 years ago where I was comparing Jewish, Muslim, and Christian groups, their uses of technology, and especially reactions to the internet. And I thought I might find, okay, this is the Hindu response or the Jewish response. But what I found, it was more that kind of a religious groups, their kind of theology of kind of culture really determine how they engage with technology. So if you kind of see that, we're called to be, to come away and be ye separate, like the Amish, or, keep a sense of kind of distance. So whether you're a conservative Christian or you're conservative Muslim, you're going to be more hesitant about technology because you're more hesitant engagement with contemporary culture. And so it really wasn't so much like a Hindu or a Jewish or Christian response. It was kind of like, how do you see what your role is in the culture of society? And every religious tradition have both. There are people who are like going forward and grabbing and experimenting with digital media and pushing the boundaries, and groups that are kind of kicking and screaming and saying, no, it's ethically problematic, it's theologically problematic. And so kind of religious groups fall into one of three groups. Either it's, the technology is a gift from God, and so it's a conduit that we can use just to get our message across, or it's kind of a value laden environment, and that it's going to seduce us if we use it. And then there's people in the middle saying no, that it's basically technology is tamed by people. And so kind of if we bring Christian values or Jewish values into it, we can culture the technology in line with that. And that means it's going to be some things are a gift and some things are a challenge to deal with. But I think, I think most religious traditions, they fall, the group people in their group fall within one of those three camps. And there's different strategies you have to use with different ones if you're going to talk about technology, about the benefits and the challenges.
We thought, we're a streaming company. I'm sorry, Steve, real quick here. We're a streaming company. We thought maybe we would target the Amish for our next marketing campaign. How do you think that would go? I'm kidding.
I think, well, first of all, they're probably not going to pick up any of your marketing. I just had a friend that she's actually, she's from the ultra Orthodox community. Well, she grew up in the ultra Orthodox community. She's now Orthodox, so a little more open to technology. But she did a study between the Orthodox and ultra Orthodox and Amish, and so they set such strong boundaries. I mean, they don't have televisions in their home, and so they're not even going to interact with the passive media that we all come in contact with, anyways. So they're going. They probably wouldn't be very successful, except for maybe a few people who have left the community. But and they have a really good reason for what reason they don't engage technology. For the Amish community, it's all about family and community is the center. That's the most important value, and the community being in line with scripture and God's plans for it. And so anything that kind of draws them away from that is seen as sin or hindrance. And this is the same with the Jewish Orthodox community. And so media technology, it's especially the internet, it's an individual technology. At least like even television, which they have a problem with, it comes into the home and it's a community device, because mostly until recent times, most people couldn't have one for every family member. But the internet kind of encourages this secrecy, this privacy, and it basically exalts the individual over the group. And so, any technology, whether it's, the cell phone or even, certain kinds of, electronics, would be seen as sin in those communities, because it draws people away from the community accountability and faith. Whereas, in our Protestant world, individualism and individual faith and choice is kind of at the center of our, religious practice, for good or for ill. And so it's not as difficult for us to kind of, grasp these technologies, even if it puts us in different positions above people in our community.
So is it true? This is my impression. You can tell me whether it's right or not. I kind of feel that with regard to digital adoption and using digital to achieve your goals, the business world is kind of ahead of the game, and the church is typically behind the game. You'll find more laggards in that arena. Is that true? And if so, why? Maybe you've kind of talked about why that is.
Well, I think, especially for a lot of groups, you can, because church is not just about the community and the values it go into, but it's all about many ways in contemporary society. Church is about an institution and an organization, and your organizations, move slowly because, it's a sphere of loss of control. In the business world, like entrepreneurship and experimentation are really kind of values put at the top. I think in religious communities, it's about stability and dogma and doctrine, that are really kind of seen as more central. And so there's a lot of things about digital culture that are antithetical to the kind of practices or values of especially religious institutions and institutions in general. And that's why I think that a lot of groups are more hesitant. And again, it's that kind of boundary between, you know, um, how you see, the relationship to culture. Is it Christ in culture, Christ above culture, Christ against culture? And especially if you're in the kind of Christ, against culture narrative, the idea is that any of those tools from, modernity or values that are outside the tradition, that means it's drawing you away from what's central. And even if it's just even if it's just a conceptual thing, even if it's not an actual thing. So I think that's why, experimentation, doing things in beta form, the church has never, at least in the last 100 years, been good at that. We just think about the routinization of charisma, even a lot of the prophetic movements or the charismatic or kind of movements. You get somebody that's doing innovation, and then there's just the draw to kind of, let's legitimize this, let's institutionalize it, let's put a structure on it, and that goes against kind of creativity, which is so necessary for technological engagement.
Mm-hmm. So do you have, I mean, talking about, I kind of understand how the church has been more hesitant to experiment and get involved. Are there things that you could highlight over the years that some big mistakes that ministries have made with regard to technology, and some big wins that churches or ministry just in general, kind of the trends over the years that ministries have seen? Do you have any examples off the top of your head that come to mind?
Yeah, I remember back in the kind of late 90s, early 2000s, there's been a lot of kind of philosophy ideas within the church saying, oh, okay, we need to grab digital media, but we want to do it on our terms. And so we're going to build this space or this platform that will draw religious people to it. It'll be in line with our values, and then we have kind of control over the environment. And if we build that, then all the Christians or all the people from our tradition or community are going to come there because they know it's certified by our tradition in space. And there's been a lot of examples. I think one would be it was called Crosstalk. It was like a community, and it's still out there as an email community, has lots of different discussion groups. But again, it was going to be the the Facebook or the Google of Christianity. But they kind of created a lot of boundaries, saying that you have to use the technology in this way. And instead of kind of studying, okay, how are people actually using media? What kind of things do they really want out of digital or social media? And then now let's build on that. They tried to basically, I call it the field of dreams theology. If we build it, they will come, in a very box. A more recent example could be kind of GodTube. GodTube started out by a seminary student in Dallas. He wanted to create a kind of safe space that finding YouTube had too much problematic immoral content. He'd come from Hollywood, and so he kind of knew from the inside perspective the problems. And so he created this, and it was as a kind of a Christian alternative to YouTube. It worked well, but then it tried to rebrand itself as Tangle, which was going to be, again, the Facebook for Christian community. But people already invested in Facebook. And so it's like, well, do I leave all my contacts and friends and then go to this new thing? And so there's been, I know at least half dozen people, because a lot of them have come to talk to me for either advice or just, hey, research us, to help us get some attention. And it's like spending $1 million or more dollars. I'm like, going, man, if you just had spent the time to research what people in your tradition, your community really want and need, and then kind of piggyback on that, and then maybe creating kind of connection points or something. But there's a lot that can be done for free in digital culture now with all the platforms that are available, and you can save yourself a lot of money and time and heartache by maybe doing the research and actually kind of saying how can we engage in digital culture in a Christ-like way, rather than trying to just create a haven or an alternative.
That's a really good, that is very interesting. Yes. Yeah, looking back at it, you're like, yeah, I can see that now, because that would be the natural tendency to, oh, we got Facebook, but Facebook has all these problems, so let's create this other thing that's in our kosher world. So, and yeah, so you're kind of admonishing that the church needs to be able to embrace the technology that's prevalent in the culture in a manner that furthers just leverage that technology and not try to create something that's going to be, my version of this.
Exclusive.
That's a great, that is a
Yeah.
great. So do you have along those lines, so you talked about some, failed attempts at, do you have any examples that you've seen ministries that are leveraging digital technology really well? And what's the kind of the thematic approach or maybe some specific examples of how some ministries have really leveraged it and it's really, benefited the ministry?
The one thing I see is, especially in the area of kind of the what they call it, digital evangelism or online missions, but basically looking at how do we do mission work in the 21st century in a digital influence culture, and how do we use digital technologies not just to reach the people who we can connect with through the screen, but in our other cultural contexts. So there's, I think, in missions there's been a lot of interesting experimentation, anything from Campus Crusade, which is now Crew, kind of empowering small groups of people, saying, hey, go out there and figure out how could we train missionaries, how could we do missions, how could we kind of rethink what missions looks like in the 21st century. And so I call these people digital creatives, because they oftentimes are they may be in they work under the auspices of a certain organization or denomination, but really when they've been set free to experiment, to do that kind of beta testing, they come up with creative ideas. And there's a lot of networks that, and most of them you won't hear about because they're reaching out to people like Muslim born believers, in the Arab world, or all disparate communities. I've done some research and stuff in my current book that came out on digital creatives and the rethinking of religious authority, of looking at especially people that use technology in Turkey and in other parts of the Arab world, where they can't form a church, where Christianity is still illegal, but they can kind of leverage that in creative ways, and they can also create a support network with Muslims that exist in countries where it is free to exercise Christianity, and create these kind of global support networks. So I think that there's a lot of, in missions that we can see a lot of interesting examples of people kind of, whether they're using, creating, turning old-fashioned correspondence courses into kind of, things that are done through the mobile phone, and you can directly text people, to, digital discipleship and mentorship through, websites and other app platforms. So a lot of creativity there in missions, I think.
Yeah. And I assume you've seen the shift between, the church was focused on local. It's for, my church, the church is, it's the people that come through the doors. And over the past 20 years, we've seen, I think churches have seen that boundary being removed. And how effective can you be when you get beyond your local church to achieve that mission? What have you seen there, and what can we foresee in the future?
Well, I think, it's, I had once a master's student that, came to work with me, and she had a very interesting story where she grew up in an atheist home, and from an Asian background. Her parents were very resistant to Christianity, but she went online. She was going through a point of crisis in her life, and so she was going online, and she found herself on one of these, I think it was through InterVarsity, a discussion group, and she began talking to someone, and they kind of basically adopted her and they mentored her in Christianity, and so she became a Christian without ever actually setting foot in a church, or being part of a Christian organization. It wasn't until she went to college that she actually was the first time she actually met face-to-face Christians. And this was just in 2000, mid 2000s that this happened. So I just think it's there's just a lot interesting to see kind of how technology can be used as this kind of gateway for people to kind of interact. And I think it's kind of, we used to think church is local, and then I think there was a phase where church is global, and we need to go into all the world, and it was all focused on how do we get out there and sending people to missions. I think now there's been this return to what we call in sociology the glocal, where it was basically, we know that the local, investing in your local community is so important, but having a global perspective and offering those opportunities for connection. And I think the internet is just great for that, and I think that's a lot of people have seen through this last year in COVID, is that, hey, we can use technology to build our local congregation congregation. We can also connect with people outside our community, and we can kind of see what our church having a global impact through relationships, through offering our services online, and just kind of being a presence in the digital age.
Phil's going to jump in and call time on us, I'm sure.
I am. We're just about out of time. I think you pretty much answered my next question here, but of all the religious groups that you are familiar with, would you say it's the evangelicals that are really using digital media the best?
Well, I guess it depends on how you say the best. I mean, actually, it's the Catholics that have been the most innovative historically in their use of media, partially because they have the central institution. And so they've developed a very clear theology of communications and social communications. And so, the Vatican can send out a message saying, hey, this is what, we said in 1946 about movies. This is what we say now about the internet. Let's all go for it. And so at least it gives like kind of a rallying cry. And the first televangelists were not evangelicals. It was, Bishop Fulton Sheen, who was a Catholic, and then there was charismatics that were part of that tradition. So I've also kind of the Lubavitch Jews who basically they don't evangelize people outside the Jewish tradition, but are really calling secular Jews back to religious faith. They have some of the most creative websites and strategies for outreach, both kind of through technology and face to face, because their commitment. So I'd say there's a strong historic tradition of Protestants, but we weren't always the first ones to the table to do these things. And there's a lot of things we could learn from other religious traditions as well.
Good answer. So we are out of time, so I'm going to cut Steve off here. Professor Dr. Heidi Campbell, Professor of Communication at Texas A&M, has been our guest today. Dr. Campbell, thank you so much. Look, you've got lots of books and lots of stuff out there for our listeners, and our listeners are mainly pastors, associate pastors, very important volunteers for their churches and things. What book would you recommend that you've written or been involved with? What would you recommend for somebody to pick up, and where could they get it?
Well, I would recommend, actually, this year I was able to put together 2 edited collections. One's called The Distance Church for Pastors. It's bringing pastors as well as research together, looking at how do we need to respond to technology in especially times of crisis like this. And the other book is called Digital Ecclesiology. And so it's a follow-up looking at the deeper theological issues and theologians wrestling with how do we think theologically about culture in a digital age. Those books, if the Digital Ecclesiology and the Distance Church, are available free, so you can download them. So that's a great place to start on looking at these topics, as well as getting an introduction to my work.
So when you say download them free, where do they go to download them?
Well, I can send you the link for information there, but they're under, it's called Oak Trust. They're e-published books through my university, but if they just Google the Distance Church and my name, or Digital Ecclesiology and my name, and look for something that comes under Oak Trust, Texas A&M University, they'll find them.
All right. Awesome.
And I searched just your name and I found them. So if you throw the book name in there, you're going to definitely get it.
Well, there you go. There you have it. All right. Well, Dr. Campbell, thank you so much for being our guest today on the Church Solutions podcast.
Thank you for having me.
All right. And thank you, Steve, for being a part of things, as usual. Good questions. And I'm Phil Thompson. And for all of us here at streamingchurch.tv and all the other things we do here, thank you for spending some time either watching this video or listening to the Church Solutions podcast. Please take care of yourselves. We'll see you again next time. Take care.